My retirement savings. I looked at my son across the kitchen table. What about them? I need all of it. He said the words without hesitation. Not a request, not even really a question. A demand. Daniel was 41. I was 70. My coffee had gone cold between my hands. Outside, rain tapped against the kitchen window. The same window I had replaced 26 years earlier when the original frame began leaking. Daniel leaned forward. Dad, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. What opportunity? The restaurant group. I had heard about it for months. Daniel wanted to buy into a small chain of neighborhood restaurants and expand them into nearby cities. He had spreadsheets, business plans, projected revenue, investor presentations. He had spent weeks telling me how much money he could make. Now he wanted my retirement savings to make it happen. How much are you asking for? I said. All of it. I stared at him. You know what all of it means? Yes, my retirement account is what I live on. You still have the house. I frowned. What? Yes, Daniel, I live in it. You could borrow against it. I put down my cup. You want me to risk my house too? Dad, I'm not asking you to risk it. You just told me to borrow against it. Because this business is different. I laughed quietly. How? This can actually make money. You said that about your last business. That was different. You lost $70,000. I learned from it. I looked at him. Did you? He became irritated. Why do you always assume I'm going to fail? Because you keep asking me to finance the next thing after the last thing fails. He leaned back. So that's it? What? You're just going to sit on all that money while your own son tries to build something. I stared at him. I spent 45 years building that money, and I'm asking you to invest it. You're asking me to hand you my retirement. I'll pay you back. When? When the business takes off. That isn't a date, he sighed. You're being difficult. No, I shook my head. I'm being careful. He stared at me, then he said something that changed the entire conversation. You owe me. I felt my chest tighten. For what? For everything I've done for this family. I almost laughed. What exactly have you done? I've lived here for 20 years. Silence. I stared at him. Then I understood. Daniel wasn't talking about my retirement account anymore. He was talking about my house. The house he had moved into when he was 21. The house he had never paid rent for. The house where he had stayed through college, after college, during his first failed business, and through the years when he worked for different companies. 20 years. 20 years of living under my roof for free. And now, he believed that because he had lived there, he was entitled to my savings. He pushed his chair back. I'll call you tomorrow. I nodded. Don't. He stopped. Why? Because tomorrow we aren't going to discuss my retirement account. He looked confused. We're going to discuss your 20 years of unpaid rent. His face changed. What? I smiled. My lawyer has been waiting for me to ask, and for the first time since Daniel walked into my kitchen, he looked afraid. My name is Thomas Harris. I was 70 when my son demanded my retirement savings. I bought my house in 1994. At the time, it was nothing special. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a detached garage, a backyard with a dying apple tree. My wife, Susan, loved it immediately. Daniel was 15. He complained about the neighborhood, said it was too quiet, said there was nothing to do. Susan laughed. That's because you're supposed to be doing homework. Those were good years. Simple years. Daniel played baseball. I worked at a manufacturing plant. Susan taught elementary school. We didn't have much extra money, but we had stability. When Daniel graduated high school, he went to a local community college. He stayed home. That was normal. Then 1 year became 2, then 3. Eventually, he stopped talking about moving out. When Susan died, everything changed. Daniel was 23. I was 52. The house became too quiet. He started staying home more. I never pushed him. I thought we were helping each other. Then Daniel got his first full-time job. He didn't move out. He bought a car. Still didn't move out. He got engaged. Still didn't move out. Then the engagement ended. He told me he was saving money. Still didn't move out. Eventually, he started a small online business. It failed. He said he needed another year. I gave him another year, then another. I never charged him rent. Not even once. I paid the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs, everything. I told myself it was temporary. Then temporary became 20 years. The strange thing was, I never resented it. Not until that morning. Not until my son looked at the savings I had spent decades building and told me I owed him. That changed the meaning of every unpaid year. Because suddenly, his free room wasn't generosity. In his mind, it was ownership. And I realized I had created part of this problem myself. I had made living with me so easy. that Daniel had never been forced to become fully independent. I had protected him from consequences, and now he believed I was the one who needed to compensate him. The next morning, Daniel returned. He arrived at 8, no apology, no small talk. He walked into the kitchen carrying a binder. I brought the business plan. I looked at him. You don't need to show me. Yes, I do. He placed it on the table. This is going to work. I opened the first page. Projected revenue, expansion plans, restaurant locations, marketing strategy. Everything looked impressive. How much is the initial investment? $480,000. I looked at him. You want nearly $500,000. Yes. From my retirement. Yes. What do you have? He hesitated. About $30,000. I looked at the papers. So you're asking me to provide over 90%. I'll run it. Have you run a restaurant before? No. You've never managed a restaurant. I know how businesses work. I smiled. Do you? He became defensive. Dad, you're doing it again. Doing what? Talking to me like I'm a child. You're asking your retired father to risk his entire retirement on a business you've never operated. You have to believe in me. I closed the binder. I believe you want it. That isn't enough. No. I shook my head. It isn't. He leaned forward. Why are you so determined to keep your money? The question was so strange that I almost didn't answer. Because it's mine. He laughed. That's your argument? Yes, you've got more money than you need. How do you know? You have the house. And you've got savings. That doesn't make them yours. He shook his head. You don't understand. Maybe you don't. Then he said, you've had 30 years in that house while I paid for nothing. I stared at him. What did you just say? You heard me. You've paid for nothing? I've contributed. To what? He stood. I've maintained the place. I almost laughed. Name one major repair you paid for. Silence. Name one property tax bill. Nothing. Name one mortgage payment. Nothing. He looked angry. I've been there for you. I sat back and I have been there for you. He pointed at me. That doesn't mean you own everything. I looked at him. Actually, Daniel, it does. He froze. I continued. Because I bought it. Daniel left angry. He slammed the front door. I waited until I heard his car disappear. Then I called Andrew Lewis, my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. Thomas, we need to talk. I suspected we might. Did Daniel contact you? No. He's demanding my retirement savings. Andrew was silent for a moment. On what basis? He says I owe him for living in the house. That got his attention. 20 years? Yes. Interesting. What does interesting mean? It means we need to look at something. What? Do you still have the original property agreements from when Daniel began living there as an adult? I have everything. Good. What are you thinking? I want to review your estate plan and the title records. Why? Because if Daniel thinks residence creates ownership rights, we need to make sure the legal documents say exactly what they should say. I laughed. They do. Probably. You'd be surprised how many families operate on assumptions instead of paperwork. I looked at the hallway. Daniel had lived in that house longer than he had lived anywhere else. Maybe there was something I hadn't considered. Andrew arrived that afternoon. He brought a thick file. We sat at my dining room table. After an hour, he leaned back. Thomas, I think your son has misunderstood the situation. I know. No. He tapped the folder. I mean seriously misunderstood. What did you find? He opened an old document. It was a simple agreement from 2004. Daniel had signed it. I stared at the page. What is that? An occupancy agreement. I frowned. I don't remember this. You signed it after he turned 25. I read it again. It stated that Daniel could remain in the property while he established financial independence. There was another clause. I looked at Andrew. What does this mean? He pointed to the page. Your son agreed that the arrangement was temporary. And he also agreed to contribute $300 per month toward household costs. I stared at him. Did he ever pay? Andrew smiled. No. I shook my head. I completely forgot about this. That isn't all. He turned the page. There is a second provision. I leaned closer. What? The agreement says any unpaid contributions remain recoverable. I looked at him. For how long? He smiled. 20 years. My mouth fell open. You're telling me. Andrew closed the file. Your son has just demanded your retirement savings while apparently owing you 2 decades of unpaid housing costs. I stared at the document. That's almost $72,000. Correct. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because the situation had become so absurd that I didn't know what else to do. But Andrew wasn't finished. He pulled out another file. There are more expenses. What expenses? Utilities. Daniel never paid those. I know. Property insurance? No. Repairs? No. Then what? Andrew looked at me. His parking arrangement. I frowned. His what? 20 years of exclusive garage use. I stared at him. You're joking. I am not. He opened another spreadsheet, and the total was much higher than I expected. My son had demanded my retirement savings. He apparently hadn't realized that his father had kept the receipts. The next morning, I asked Daniel to come over. He arrived angry. If this is about the retirement money again, I already told you. I placed an envelope on the table. What's that? A bill. He laughed. Seriously? Yes, he opened it. Then stopped smiling. I watched his eyes move down the page. Outstanding occupancy and household contributions. $72,000. He looked up. What is this? 20 years of unpaid contributions. You can't charge me now. I can. But you never asked for it. I didn't need it. He stared at me. So why are you doing this? Because yesterday you told me I owed you for living in your childhood home. You're twisting my words. No. I pointed at the agreement. You signed this. I was 25. You were an adult. I didn't understand. You understood enough to sign. He pushed the paper away. It gets more ridiculous. I placed the second page in front of him. Utilities. He stared. 14,860 T. Then the third property, maintenance. 9,400. Then another. Garage use. Dad. I kept going. Your portion of the insurance. Your unpaid share of the property tax increase. Your internet and household expenses. The numbers accumulated. Finally, I placed one last page on the table. Total, 109,042 watts. Daniel stared at it. The room was silent. Then he laughed nervously. You're charging your own son rent. No. I shook my head. I'm showing you what your argument looks like when we both apply it. He looked angry. That isn't fair. Neither is demanding my retirement. He sat back. Are you going to make me pay this? I looked at him. No. He looked surprised. Then what's the point? The point is that you don't owe me your gratitude. I paused. But you don't get to rewrite 2 decades of my support as something you earned. He said nothing. Then I handed him one more document, a proposal. He read it, and for the first time that morning, I saw something other than anger on his face. Fear. The document was not a demand for payment. It was a choice. Daniel could remain in the house for 6 months while he found independent housing. During that time, he would pay a reasonable monthly rent, or he could move out immediately. The $109,742 would not be pursued if he honored the new arrangement. But there was one condition. He would not receive any of my retirement money, not a dollar. Daniel stared at the page. So this is punishment? No. Then why are you doing this? Because you're 41. I looked at him, and I think it's time you learn to live as an adult. He leaned back. What if the business fails without me having the money? Then it wasn't strong enough to begin with. That isn't fair. Life isn't an investor. He looked down. I continued. You wanted my retirement savings because you believed you were entitled to them. I wanted a chance. You still have one. With what? Your own money. He looked at me. I don't have enough. Then start smaller. He laughed bitterly. You make it sound easy. No. I shook my head. I make it sound possible. He sat quietly. Then he folded the papers. I need time. Take a week. He stood. At the door he turned. Do you really think I'm that irresponsible? I looked at my son. I think you've been protected from the answer for 20 years. He said nothing. Then he left. I closed the door. For the first time in 2 decades, I wondered what my house would feel like without my adult son living in it. And strangely, I wasn't afraid. I was relieved, because perhaps my son's demand for my retirement savings had finally forced us to confront the debt neither of us had wanted to name. Not just money, dependence. And the next discovery would show me that there was something else Daniel had been hiding. Something that made his sudden desperation for my retirement account much more dangerous than I realized. Daniel came back 5 days later. He didn't bring the business plan. He didn't bring the angry expression either. He looked tired. He stood in the doorway holding a white envelope. Dad, come in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had argued about my retirement savings. He placed the envelope in front of me. What is that? A bank statement. I opened it. There were several accounts listed: business checking, personal savings, credit cards, loans. I looked up. Why are you showing me this? Because you were right. About what? I don't have enough money. I waited. He rubbed his hands together. I owe more than I told you. How much? He looked at the table. About $310,000. I stared at him. 310,000. Yes, what kind of debt? Business loans, credit cards, private investors. I leaned back. And you wanted my retirement savings to pay it? Partly. What did you actually need? 480,000. I shook my head. You weren't starting a business. No. You were trying to rescue yourself. He nodded. I looked at the papers. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd say no. That isn't an answer. He swallowed. I was embarrassed. I said nothing. Then he reached into the envelope and pulled out another document. This is the business plan. I read the first page. The restaurant venture was real. But it wasn't his. He had been offered a minority position if he could produce a large capital contribution. He had already signed preliminary agreements. If he couldn't produce the money, he would lose a $50,000 deposit. I looked at him. You already signed this? Yes. Without the money? Yes. Why? He looked ashamed. Because I thought you'd help. I closed the document. That was the real problem. For 20 years, Daniel had never had to face the full consequences of his decisions. He had always assumed I would be there, and now he had made the biggest gamble of his life based on that assumption. I asked, who is the investor? An old business contact. Name? Marcus Reed. I recognized the name. Marcus had once approached me about buying part of my company. I hadn't trusted him. Does Marcus know you don't have the money? No. Does he know you're depending on me? No. I stared at my son. Then this isn't only my money you're risking. I know. It's your reputation. He nodded. And your legal position. He looked confused. What do you mean? I pointed to the contract. You've signed a personal guarantee. His face went pale. What? You guaranteed the investment personally. He looked at the document. That's impossible. It's right here. He read the clause. I watched the realization settle over him. He hadn't simply risked a business opportunity. He had put himself personally on the hook. And if the deal failed, the investor could pursue him. Daniel slowly sat back. What am I going to do? I looked at my son. For the first time, he wasn't asking me for money. He was asking me for help. There was a difference, but I still wasn't going to rescue him. I called Andrew. He arrived that evening. He reviewed the contracts. Then he looked at Daniel. Did you sign these voluntarily? Yes. Did anyone threaten you? No. Did you understand the guarantee? Daniel hesitated. Not completely. Andrew nodded. Then we need to determine whether the agreement is enforceable as written. Daniel looked at me. Dad, can you help? I am helping. Andrew opened another file. This is where your father's involvement matters. Daniel frowned. What does this have to do with Dad? Andrew looked at me, then at Daniel. Your father owns the house. Yes. You've lived there for 20 years. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Yes. Under a written occupancy agreement. Yes. You've failed to make the required contributions. Yes. Andrew slid the previous bill across the table. Your father has a potential claim for more than $100,000. Daniel looked at me. Dad. I held up my hand. That's not why we're here. Andrew nodded. Exactly. He took out another document. This is a proposed settlement. Daniel picked it up. I watched him read. The $109,742 wouldn't be collected. Instead, Daniel would sign a formal move-out agreement and release any claim to the property. In exchange, I would provide him with limited financial assistance. Not the retirement money. Not even close. A fixed amount. Enough to cover legal fees and allow him to negotiate his business obligations. But every dollar would be documented as a loan. He would repay it. No more vague promises. No more. I'll pay you back when the business works. A real loan, a real schedule, a real contract. Daniel looked at me. You'd still lend me money? Yes, after everything. Yes. He looked confused. Why? Because helping you isn't the problem. I paused. Helping you without requiring responsibility is the problem. He looked down at the agreement. I don't know if I deserve it. You don't. He looked up. But you need it. He nodded. And those are different things. Daniel moved out 6 weeks later. It was strange watching him pack. For 20 years his belongings had filled half the houses. Old sports equipment, boxes of paperwork, clothes, furniture, things I hadn't realized were still there. At one point, he held up an old lamp. Mom bought this. I smiled. I remember. He was quiet. Do you? Every time I see it. He looked around his bedroom, the room where he had lived as a young man, the room where he had once brought his first girlfriend, the room where he had slept through his 20s, the room he had never expected to leave. I thought I'd live here forever, he said. I know. Maybe that's why I never really left. I looked at him. That may be true. He laughed sadly. That's pretty pathetic. No. I shook my head. It's human. He looked at me. I should have moved out years ago. Yes, I wasted a lot of time. Yes, but you let me. I nodded. I did. Why? I took a breath. Because I was afraid of what? That if I stopped helping, you'd think I didn't love you. He looked at me. And what happened? I learned that love without boundaries can become another kind of harm. He nodded slowly. Then he hugged me. It was the first time in years that the hug felt like a goodbye to childhood, rather than a request for help. After Daniel left, the house felt enormous. Not lonely, just different. For 20 years there had always been someone upstairs. Television, footsteps, doors, pun calls. Argument, music, now nothing. The first morning, I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt peace. I could hear the clock, the refrigerator, birds outside, my own breathing. I hadn't realized how much of my retirement had been spent waiting for my adult son to become independent. Now he finally was, and I was finally free to be retired. I started doing things I had postponed. I joined a woodworking class. I traveled. I repaired the old apple tree in the backyard. I even took a short trip to Maine. For the first time in years, my days belonged entirely to me. Then, 3 months later, Daniel called. "Dad?" "Yes." "The restaurant deal collapsed." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry. They canceled the investment." "What happened?" Marcus pulled out. "Why?" "The due diligence found the debt." I was quiet. Daniel continued. "They also found that I didn't have the capital I promised." I nodded. "Are you okay?" "I'll be fine." That sentence meant more to me than the failed business. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't blaming me. He wasn't demanding another chance. He had accepted reality. "I have another job opportunity," he said. "Doing what?" "Regional sales." "That's good. It isn't glamorous." I smiled. "Neither was my first job." He laughed. "I know." "Then," he said, "I'll be all right, Dad." I believed him. I never touched my retirement savings. Not for Daniel, not for the business, not even when he was struggling. I left the account exactly where it was. I met with my financial advisor and adjusted my plans, reduced unnecessary expenses, increased my travel budget, set aside money for medical care, and created a small education fund for my grandchildren. I didn't tell Daniel how much I had. He didn't ask. That was another sign he was changing. Before, every conversation eventually became about money. Now we talked about life, his new job, my woodworking, the weather, his apartment, my garden, ordinary things. That was the relationship I had wanted all along. Not father as investor, father and son. A year after Daniel moved out, Andrew asked me to come to his office. Daniel was already there. I looked at my son. "What happened?" Andrew smiled. "Nothing bad." He placed the envelope in front of Daniel. Daniel laughed. "Another bill." "Yes." Daniel opened it. His eyes widened. I leaned over. The amount was $9,742. He looked at me. "Dad," I laughed. "I thought we settled this." "We did," Andrew said. Daniel looked confused. "Then why is it here?" Andrew turned the paper around. "Read the note at the bottom." Daniel did. The bill had been marked, paid in full. Daniel stared at it. "What?" Andrew explained. "Your father formally waived the outstanding amount when you moved out." Daniel looked at me. "You did?" "Yes." "Wise?" "Because I never wanted the money." Daniel sat silent, then he smiled. "You could have collected, I know, and you didn't." "No." He looked at the bill again, then he laughed. "That was a hell of a lesson." I smiled. "It wasn't a lesson." "What was it?" "A reminder." "Of what?" "That we can keep score with money forever." I paused. "Or we can decide when the account is closed." Daniel nodded. He folded the bill. "Can I keep this?" "Yes." "Why?" He smiled. "So I remember what I owed you," I corrected him. "No." He looked at me. "So you remember what I forgave." He nodded. The restaurant venture eventually opened without Daniel. I heard about it once, then I stopped following the story. Maybe it succeeded. Maybe it didn't. It no longer mattered. Daniel found work elsewhere. He rented a small apartment. He paid his own bills. He built up savings slowly. It wasn't the glamorous life he had imagined, but it was his. One Sunday he came over for lunch. He brought a pie. "You made that?" "No." I laughed. "Good." He rolled his eyes. Then he said, "I'm saving for a house." I smiled. "Already?" "Eventually." "How much have you saved?" "Don't ask." I laughed. "Fair." Then he looked at me. "I want to buy one without asking you for the down payment." I nodded. "That will mean more than any house I could buy for you." He smiled. "That's what I'm aiming for." I used to think debt was about money. A loan, a mortgage, a credit card, an unpaid bill. Now I know there are other kinds. Daniel owed me money. But more importantly, he owed himself independence. I owed him honesty. Because I had allowed him to stay dependent for too long. Neither of us fixed that by transferring money. We fixed it by changing the relationship. My son had demanded my retirement savings because he thought I was holding his future hostage. I thought he was trying to steal mine. The truth was more complicated. We were both stuck in an old arrangement. He was the child who never fully left. I was the father who never stopped providing. The business venture simply exposed it. The lawyer's bill made the imbalance visible, but the real work was learning to live differently afterward. If I could go back 20 years, I would do several things differently. I would have charged Daniel a modest rent once he became financially independent. Not because I needed the money, because responsibility matters. I would have made him pay his own insurance, his own phone, his own groceries. I would have encouraged him to move out earlier. And I would have stopped using the phrase, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." That sentence sounds loving. Sometimes it is, but repeated too often, it teaches an adult child that consequences belong to someone else. I learned that too late. Daniel learned it even later. But we learned. That matters. A few months ago, Daniel and I were sitting in my kitchen, the same table, the same chairs. Everything looked exactly the same. He asked, "Dad, how are your investments?" I looked at him. "Why? I'm not asking for money." I smiled. "I know." He laughed. "I'm just curious." "They're fine." "Good." Then he said, "You know, I used to think you were selfish for keeping that money, and now I think you're smart." I laughed. "Good answer." He looked down. "I wish I'd understood that before." "So do I." He nodded. "But maybe I needed to fail." "Probably. Not financially." He looked at me. "Personally, that was a hard truth. The restaurant venture failed. The debt remained. His reputation suffered. But he finally stopped expecting someone else to rescue him. That was worth more than the business. After Daniel moved out, I renovated his old room. I didn't turn it into an office. I didn't sell the furniture. I made it a guest room. My grandchildren sleep there when they visit. The first time they stayed, my granddaughter asked, "Was this Dad's room?" "Yes." "Did he really live here forever?" I laughed. "Almost," she smiled. "Where does Dad live now? In his own apartment. Does he like it?" "Yes." "Good." That little conversation meant more to me than she knew, because there was no resentment in it, no financial discussion, no idea that Dad was entitled to Grandpa's house, just a child accepting that adults have their own homes. I sat on the edge of the bed after they fell asleep, and I realized the house had finally become what it was supposed to be. Not an inheritance, not a source of leverage. Home. Daniel still calls me when he has a problem. Sometimes I help, sometimes I don't. That hasn't changed. What has changed is what happens afterward. If I say no, he doesn't argue. If I say yes, he doesn't assume it will happen again. That is freedom. For both of us, my retirement savings are still mine. Daniel's income is his. My house is mine. His apartment is his. And our relationship belongs to neither. It exists because we choose to maintain it. That is far healthier than what we had before. The day my son demanded my retirement savings, I thought I was defending my money. I wasn't. I was defending a boundary. The lawyer's bill for 20 years of back rent was never really about collecting $109,742. It was about showing my son the value of everything he had been receiving without noticing. A roof, heat, privacy, safety, a second chance. A father who kept saying yes. And once he understood that, he stopped asking me to finance his future. He started building it himself. I keep a copy of that $109,742's bill in my desk drawer. Not because I want Daniel to feel guilty, because it reminds me of something too. Parents can accidentally create the very dependence they later resent. We can call it love. We can call it support. We can call it family. Sometimes it is all three. But there still has to be a line. My son crossed that line when he demanded my retirement savings. I crossed it years earlier when I taught him that he would never have to stand alone. The lawyer's bill forced both of us to see it. I didn't take the money. I didn't evict him immediately. I didn't destroy his business. I gave him a choice: become independent or remain dependent and eventually lose the relationship entirely. He chose independence, and that was the best decision he ever made. Today, Daniel and I have dinner once a month. He pays for his own meal. Sometimes he offers to pay for mine. I usually let him, not because I need him to, because sometimes allowing your child to give something back is another way of letting them grow. And whenever he leaves my house, he says, "Love you, Dad." I say it back. No money attached, no business proposal, no unpaid debt, just love. Maybe that is what we were trying to find all along. My son demanded my retirement savings for his business venture. The lawyer handed him a bill for 20 years of back rent, but the real debt was never $109,742. The real debt was the independence my son had postponed, and the real payment wasn't money. It was watching him finally walk out of my house carrying his own life. That was something no retirement account could have bought. If this story made you think about adult children, financial boundaries, and the difference between helping and enabling, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional family stories about money, betrayal, boundaries, consequences, and second chances.